Hi there, in the workshop this week we're going to be using our Peanut 2 mini jig to make a full-size carcass jig. Now I've talked about the Peanut 2 system, the mini jig and the full-size jig in other videos, so I won't dwell on those too much, but what I will say very quickly is, in the interest of transparency, these products have been supplied for review by Intelligent Fixings and Axminster Tools. I haven't been paid to make this video or to say nice things about the product, but I am an affiliate of those companies, and if you use the links in the video description down below to make a purchase, I may earn from qualifying sales, so thank you very much to anybody who does just that. Now, I said when I reviewed the mini jig that it doesn't replace the full-size jig, which remains available and is still a very versatile and sophisticated piece of equipment capable of working on lots of different depths of cabinets. The truth is, though, when I was in the fitted furniture business, I didn't make many depths of cabinets. Most of my wardrobes, for example, were 550mm deep, and most of my bookcases were 300mm deep. So I've taken the components from the mini jig and I've used those to make my own carcass jig just to my needs. Now, make no mistake, the jig that I'll be making today is nothing like as sophisticated as the one that you'll get from Intelligent Fixings, but it does the job just fine. This is a proof of concept one that I made for a 550mm carcass. I'm actually going to be remaking that for a 600mm carcass because I've got a couple of drawer units to make at the other end of the workshop to continue the makeover. So that's what I'll be doing next, and I'll talk you through it as we go. With the piece sized up, I'm ripping a 70mm-ish strip off the top. And then another that matches the 30mm guide bush. I'm using the guide bush itself as a reference for this. And then I can use the excellent straw-bite waist side jigs to make the cut accurately. Alrighty, so this is our jig body, our template body. I'm calling it a template because I'm actually going to use this to make the jigs from. There's some good reasons for that, and I'll explain those later on. But basically we've got the piece of plywood split into three parts. Fairly obviously we're going to use the central strip to make the slots that our guide bush will run in, or the router will run in. You can put these in wherever you like and whatever size you like, but the Peanut jig puts them in with 12mm of travel. So you've got a 30mm guide bush and 12mm of travel gives you a 42mm opening, a 42mm aperture. So that's what we'll do to start with. We'll get this centered. We'll cut this strip in half so that we can move them out to get our perfect position, and then we'll figure out where the other two need to be. I've already got a full-size 600mm wide sort of carcass sized board here with a center line marked on it, and we can reference off that for all the bits that we do on this. But let's get on with that, and I'll talk you through it as we need to. Okie dokie, so we've got our jig, our template clamped. It's marked on the center line against the 600mm template that we've got there. I've put a little double-sided tape, a little block of wood in the middle here so that we can move these and get them back in the same place. What we need to do now is figure out where the hole for the guide bush needs to start back here, and that's fairly easy to do. What we're going to do, we're going to take our mini jig against the edge of our little template, and we'll just take a pencil and mark the inside of that. I'm extending that pencil line down to the workpiece, then removing the strip from both sides. I can cut them together to make sure they're identical. So that's all working out pretty well. I've cut everything down. The two middle bits go in against the stop as they did before. We can fit the end pieces with the drilling bush so we know where they need to be. And then we can glue that other half on like so. Make sure it's all nice and flush. And that'll do us nicely. So I'm going to go on with that now. And then while the glue dries, I'm going to tell you why I'm going to use this as a template and not as the final jig. Okay, so that's all glued up and drying. It's in clamps, it's all taped up, so it's nice and snug and nice and flat. We'll give that 10 minutes, that'll be dry enough for us to do what we need to do with it. Let's just talk quickly about why I'm going to use that as a template to make up the jig rather than use that as the jig. You absolutely can use that as a jig, but the main reason I decided to use it as a template is because when you've got a three-parter like this, and this was the prototype one that I made for the proof of concept jig, when you fit a fence to it, the fence actually comes just over the edge there. So whenever you're pinning or screwing or whatever you're doing to fix the fence, there's not a lot of meat under that join, and I'm just happier to have that as a flat single piece. It'll probably be fine if you glued it properly. You could even joint it with dominoes or something, but I just prefer to have that as made from a single piece like this, and you can see on there where the fence pokes through by just about 6, in fact exactly 6mm. We can use a little piece of 6mm scrap to set the fence where we want it to be. That's for an 18mm thick board. So that's what we'll do next. We've got a blank. As soon as that's dry, we'll just use a flush trim bit to cut out those apertures. And the other reason for doing it this way is I want to make a couple of jigs. I want to make one with a fence and one without. So rather than trying to mess about making a removable fence, it's really simple when you've got a template set up like this, just to run off a second jig with a flush trim bit. So yeah. With the corners drilled, I'm using the jigsaw to take out the bulk of the waste. Then finishing off with a flush trim bit and a palm router. And finally a quick sand over to take out any furriness at the edges. Alrighty, for the fence we've just got a piece of 22mm MRMDF. Use whatever you want as long as it's straight and about the right size. Just going to pop a couple of clamps on that. And I said earlier that the fence has to sort of overhang the little aperture cutouts by 6mm. And what I've done, I've got a couple of little scraps of 6mm that just fit in there, so that we can get that nice and snug. This is to centre it on an 18mm board. Obviously, if you want to make one that's specific to 22mm boards, be my guest. Here we go, and then I'll just fix that. With a couple of staples, and then we can pop a couple of screws in there for good measure. So last thing we want to do before we start using the jig is to just make sure that it's dialed in properly, so when you flip it around both ends match up. And because we've already fitted the fence, you can't do this if you were smart before you fitted the fence, but because I fitted the fence, I'm going to do this on the edge. So we're just going to put a piece of tape down there, and just as a visual reference, we'll put a center line on there. I've put a couple of stops in. These should be 5mm beyond the edges of these apertures, so that's where they ought to be. Let's offer this up. Fits pretty nicely, and that looks about centered in there. And all we're going to do, we put a line down the side of each aperture, each cutout. We take it off, we flip it around so the stops engage. We do another couple of lines, and those lines should be identical, near as damn it, if that's centered. And that looks pretty good to me. So with that done, we can then give ourselves a center on this, because that's useful to have. And then we can fix these stops in place. So that's pretty much all there is to it, to knock out a quick carcass jig to your size and specifications using the components that come with your Peanut mini jig and a few bits of plywood scrap. I've added into that mix a dedicated router for this. This is Trends T4. I've had this one forever. It's their sort of entry-level 1/4-inch router. You can buy these new for about 70 quid or thereabouts. I've got an 8mm collet for it, cost about another tenner, and I'm using the 8mm short router cutter that comes with the starter kit. You add that 70 or 80 pounds to the 170 that the Peanut mini jig starter kit costs, and an hour of your time and a few bits of plywood scrap, and you're spending, 300 quid or thereabouts on what is an absolutely dedicated system for all your general carcass needs and everything that you might use the mini jig for. I think that's a pretty compelling price for something that's really very capable. I said at the start of the video that I'm going to put together a couple of carcasses for the other end of the workshop. I'm going to make one of these with my homemade mini jig, carcass jig, and I'm going to make the other one with my Lamello Zeta P2, and I'm going to compare the two of them and just see how long it takes, because honestly, for a £300 solution, I think this is going to be surprisingly good, surprisingly capable. So be sure to join me for that one. That's it for this week though. While my Patreon and YouTube member credits roll, I'm just going to bang together a quick proof of concept box with this jig, so stay watching if you want to see that. But that's all for this week. Thanks as always for watching. Stay safe, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.